Mr. Samuel Hart, a tall, elderly black man with sharp eyes and an air of quiet dignity, stepped into the cafe. He wore a well-fitted gray suit, simple yet elegant, that spoke to a lifetime of understated taste. He scanned the space, taking in the scene of a bustling crowd, trendy decor, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. It was a busy morning, with young professionals and influencers in their prime capturing moments, and the staff whirred around like bees in a hive, seemingly oblivious to his presence. Samuel joined the line, waiting for his turn to order. He didn't mind the wait. He'd been a patient man all his life, weathering storms others wouldn't dare face. But as the line moved, he noticed something peculiar. The young barista at the counter, a lean, tattooed man with an air of haughty disinterest, seemed to greet the other patrons with warmth and familiarity, flashing a polite smile here and there. However, his gaze slid right past Samuel as if he were invisible. When it was finally Samuel's turn, the barista glanced at him with a fleeting look of irritation, as though the elderly man had disrupted the rhythm of his morning. "What can I get you?" the barista asked, barely lifting his eyes to meet Samuel's. Samuel offered a gentle smile, one that reached his wise eyes. "Just a black coffee, please." The barista's lips curled slightly as he keyed in the order. "Black coffee," he repeated with a faint smirk, as though it were a quaint choice, an old man's drink that held no place in the sleek world of artisanal lattes and flavored cold brews. He muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Samuel to hear. "Figures." Samuel didn't react, choosing instead to observe the young man's expression. He'd faced comments like these before, little slights and whispers that people thought he couldn't hear, or that he was too old to understand. But he understood all too well. They thought his age and background made him unfit to be here in this trendy space filled with the young and vibrant. In the past, he would have brushed off the remark, but today it struck a nerve. His gaze remained steady, unreadable, as he watched the barista's hands prepare the coffee, his fingers tapping the counter impatiently. As he reached into his wallet to pay, Samuel was met with another subtle insult. The cafe's manager, a woman in her early 30s with a polished look and a sharp, businesslike demeanor, appeared behind the counter. She assessed Samuel with a look of mild disdain that she didn't bother to hide. "Everything all right here, Brad?" she asked, glancing at the barista with a raised brow. Her voice carried an edge, something that suggested she didn't expect trouble. But she was prepared to handle it, if it arose. "Just fine, Jessica," Brad replied with a smirk, tossing a knowing look back at Samuel. "Just helping our friend here with his coffee order." Jessica turned her attention to Samuel, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Glad to hear it," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then, under her breath, she added, "Hope he's in the right place." Samuel caught the whisper, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes, a spark of emotion he quickly masked. He thanked the barista as he accepted his coffee, ignoring the looks, the smirks, the unspoken message that he didn't belong here. He took his cup and made his way to a small table by the window, away from the crowd. Sitting down, he took a moment to enjoy the view outside, the street bustling with people going about their day, unaware of the quiet storm brewing inside him. As he sipped his coffee, he couldn't help but overhear a nearby conversation. A group of young people, dressed in the latest trends, were whispering amongst themselves, casting furtive glances in his direction. One of them, a young man with a loud voice, chuckled, "Looks like Grandpa took a wrong turn and ended up here." The others laughed, casting amused looks at Samuel, who continued to sip his coffee with a calm expression. He was no stranger to moments like these, where people made assumptions based on the color of his skin, his age, his quiet demeanor. He'd encountered them in boardrooms, on the streets, even in his own establishments. They all had one thing in common: they thought they knew him. They saw only the surface, the face they wanted to see. But today there was something different, a simmering anger he hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was the way the barista had sneered at him, or the smugness in the manager's eyes, or the whispered jokes at his expense. He hadn't built his life to end up mocked in a cafe, and something inside him bristled at the thought. As he sat there, quietly taking in the scene, he noticed a young woman at the back of the cafe watching him. She seemed familiar, her face stirring a distant memory. And then it clicked: Rachel. She was a young professional who'd attended a gala he'd hosted a few months back. He recalled her polite, respectful manner, her quiet intelligence. She'd probably recognized him, but she said nothing, simply observing the scene with a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. Rachel's gaze met his, and she gave him a small, encouraging nod, as if to say she understood. Samuel nodded back, appreciating the gesture, but he had no intention of leaving the cafe without addressing the simmering disrespect. He would remain calm, dignified, the way he always had, but he wouldn't let them walk over him. Samuel took out a small notebook from his pocket, flipping it open and jotting down notes as he sipped his coffee. He wasn't writing about the service or the coffee quality. Instead, he was observing the cafe's operations, the way the staff interacted with customers, the general atmosphere. It was a habit of his, one he'd developed over years of building his business. Observing and analyzing came naturally to him, and it gave him a certain clarity, a way to step back and see the bigger picture. Brad noticed him writing and approached the table with a sneer. "You writing a Yelp review or something, old man?" he asked, his tone dripping with mockery. Samuel looked up slowly, meeting the young man's gaze. "Just taking notes," he replied calmly, his voice steady. Brad chuckled, clearly unimpressed. "Well, feedback is always appreciated. But I don't think anyone's going to take advice from someone who looks like they've never been in a place like this before." Samuel raised an eyebrow, his face expressionless. "You think so?" he asked, his tone mild. But there was a glint in his eyes that made Brad shift uncomfortably. "Just saying," Brad muttered, glancing away. He walked back to the counter, shaking his head and sharing a look with Jessica, who smirked knowingly. Jessica turned her gaze back to Samuel, her eyes full of superiority. "If you have any real feedback, feel free to post it online," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm sure we'd love to read your perspective." Rachel, still watching from her table, seemed about to intervene, her expression troubled. She caught Jessica's eye and tried to hint at the gravity of the situation, but Jessica ignored her, too absorbed in her role as the hip manager, far too certain of her position. Meanwhile, Samuel took a deep breath, leaning back in his chair as he finished his coffee. The bitterness lingered on his tongue, but he found a strange satisfaction in it. He had spent years building this cafe chain, creating spaces where people could feel welcome and valued regardless of who they were. He hadn't anticipated that such places would fall into the hands of people like Brad and Jessica, who had no respect for the principles he had laid out, who saw only their own image and failed to see the people around them. He closed his notebook, a calm smile touching his lips as he looked up and met Brad and Jessica's gaze. Samuel closed his notebook, his calm demeanor hiding the storm brewing inside him. With his coffee finished, he glanced around the cafe once more, his eyes lingering on the details he'd been noting all along: the dismissive attitude of the staff, the cold, judgmental glances from patrons, the lack of warmth that contrasted so sharply with the vision he'd once had for this place. He knew this particular cafe had become popular, frequented by a younger, trendier crowd, but he hadn't realized how much it had strayed from the original values he'd built his business on. As Samuel stood to leave, he took a steadying breath and made his way back to the counter. Brad, the barista, caught sight of him approaching and rolled his eyes, exchanging a smirk with Jessica, who seemed equally unimpressed. The two shared an amused look, clearly seeing Samuel as nothing more than a bothersome old man with a habit of overstaying his welcome. "Back for round two?" Brad asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Or did you need help finding the exit?" Samuel tilted his head, studying the young man's expression, the smugness etched into every line of his face. "Actually, I'd like to leave some feedback, if you don't mind." Jessica crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. "By all means," she said with a feigned air of interest. "We're always open to feedback, good or bad." Samuel smiled politely. "I'm glad to hear that," he replied, keeping his tone courteous. "I wanted to say that the service here today was memorable. I appreciate that you're both so comfortable in your roles that you feel free to express yourselves, even with customers." Jessica and Brad exchanged a glance, unsure if he was serious or mocking them. Brad couldn't resist another jab, though. "Well, thanks, I guess," he said with a half smile. "We like to keep things authentic." "Yes," Samuel said slowly, his smile unwavering. "Authentic. I suppose that's one word for it." Rachel, who had been watching from her seat, seemed to realize that something was happening, something far more significant than she'd initially assumed. She leaned forward, observing intently as Samuel took his time, his every word measured and purposeful. "Do you mind if I ask you both a question?" Samuel continued, looking between Brad and Jessica. "I'm curious, what do you think makes a cafe successful?" Jessica looked slightly thrown by the question, but her professional pride wouldn't let her hesitate for long. "Well," she began, crossing her arms defensively, "I'd say it's a mix of good coffee, the right atmosphere, and of course a unique brand that resonates with customers." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "Good answer," he said, glancing at Brad. "And you, Brad? What do you think?" Brad shrugged, leaning against the counter with a casual air. "Honestly, I think it's all about the crowd. Getting the right people in here, making sure we cater to the kind of folks who'll bring in more business." "I see," Samuel replied, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. And would you say I'm one of those right people? Brad let out a short laugh. No offense, but probably not, he said, smirking. You're a little out of place here, if you know what I mean. Samuel chuckled softly, the sound surprising both Brad and Jessica. It was a warm, genuine laugh, as if he'd just heard the punchline of a joke he'd been waiting for all morning. When he looked back up, there was a new spark in his gaze, a quiet but unmistakable authority that made both employees falter. Well, I'll let you in on a little secret, Samuel said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a business card. He placed it gently on the counter, pushing it toward Brad, who picked it up with a confused expression. The words on the card were clear and undeniable. Samuel Hart, founder CEO, HartCafe Group. For a moment, Brad just stared at the card, his face going pale. Jessica leaned over his shoulder, her eyes widening as she read the title, a flash of horror spreading across her expression. The reality of who they had just insulted and dismissed hit them like a thunderclap. Samuel watched their reactions with calm satisfaction. I see the two of you enjoy keeping things authentic, he said softly, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. So let me be equally authentic with you. This cafe, along with every other HartCafe location in the city, is mine. I built it from the ground up, and I had a very specific vision in mind, a vision that included respect for every customer, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Brad stammered, his earlier arrogance crumbling in an instant. Mr. Hart, we didn't realize. No, you didn't, Samuel interrupted, his tone turning sharp. You didn't think. You saw an elderly black man and decided he didn't belong here, that he wasn't worth your time or respect. I've watched the two of you over the last hour, and I can't say I'm impressed with what I've seen. Jessica swallowed hard, glancing desperately at Brad, but he seemed too stunned to respond. Samuel continued, his words measured and deliberate. You see, I didn't start this business to create spaces where people are judged based on appearances. I wanted these cafes to be places where anyone could feel welcome, where people would be treated with dignity and kindness. But today I was made to feel unwelcome in my own establishment. Rachel, who had been silently observing from her table, felt a surge of admiration for Samuel's restraint, his calm authority. She watched as he faced the two employees, who now stood silent, their bravado replaced with guilt and fear. Samuel looked around, addressing the cafe as a whole, his voice carrying a quiet power. This establishment is a reflection of the people who run it. And today, I saw an establishment that has lost sight of its values. That's a failure on my part, one I intend to correct. He turned his attention back to Brad and Jessica, his gaze unwavering. Effective immediately, both of you are terminated. You'll clean out your things and hand in your uniforms by the end of the day. I'll make sure you're both compensated for the hours you've worked. But I won't tolerate this kind of behavior in any HartCafe. The cafe had gone silent, every patron and employee frozen in shock as they absorbed the weight of Samuel's words. Jessica looked as though she might cry, while Brad just stood there, his face drained of color. Samuel turned to Rachel, who straightened up, meeting his gaze with a look of respect. Rachel, I'd appreciate it if you could help me oversee things here in the interim. I'll need someone to ensure this place is run with the respect and warmth it was meant to have. Rachel nodded, her voice steady. Of course, Mr. Hart, I'd be honored. Satisfied, Samuel looked around the cafe once more, his expression softening as he took in the sight of patrons watching him with newfound admiration. He knew that the impact of his words would linger, not just for Brad and Jessica, but for everyone who had witnessed this moment. He'd made his point without raising his voice, without descending to their level. And he had reclaimed his space, his vision, with the dignity he'd always carried with him. With one last glance at the now humbled staff, Samuel gave Rachel a nod and made his way to the door, stepping out into the fresh morning air. The cafe was left in stunned silence, a reminder that respect, like any good coffee, required the right blend of warmth and integrity to truly resonate. As Samuel stepped outside, he felt the crisp morning air wash over him, soothing the tension that had built up inside. He paused, taking a deep breath, and allowed himself a small smile. The confrontation inside the cafe had been a long time coming. Though he rarely showed anger, today had been an exception, and he felt strangely invigorated, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. For a man who had spent decades maintaining his composure in the face of adversity, this moment of assertion had been a reminder of his own resilience and the principles he'd built his business on. He turned back briefly, glancing through the glass windows to see Rachel already stepping into action. She was guiding the remaining staff, giving calm instructions as they moved past the shock of what had happened. The patrons were still murmuring, some glancing toward the door where Samuel had exited, their expressions reflecting a mixture of awe and respect. It was clear that his words had left an impact not only on the employees but also on the customers who had witnessed the encounter. Samuel knew the cafe would continue to thrive. He trusted Rachel's sense of integrity and the other loyal staff who had embraced the spirit of Hart Cafes from the start. The incident in the cafe replayed in his mind as he walked down the bustling street. Though he was used to facing prejudice, this experience had been particularly disheartening. It reminded him of the countless times he'd been dismissed, overlooked, or outright disrespected because of his appearance. He had built his business empire on the foundations of hard work and integrity, and he had always hoped that those same principles would be reflected in every branch of his cafes. Today he'd been reminded that the values he cherished required constant vigilance. As he walked, Samuel decided he would make some changes to reinforce the standards he expected in his cafes. The business had grown rapidly in recent years, expanding to several locations across the city, and he realized that this growth had come at a cost. Perhaps he had focused too much on expansion and not enough on preserving the culture he'd envisioned. He'd always wanted his cafes to be places where everyone felt welcome, a sanctuary from the fast-paced world outside. Today's encounter had been a wake-up call, a reminder that his vision needed nurturing and that his presence, his influence, was still needed to uphold the heart of his brand. Samuel's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone buzzing in his pocket. He pulled it out to see a message from Rachel. "Mr. Hart, just wanted to let you know that everything is under control here. We're making some immediate adjustments. Thank you for trusting me with this responsibility." He smiled as he read the message, feeling a sense of pride in Rachel's swift response. She was a rare find, someone who truly understood what he wanted Hart Cafes to represent. He quickly typed a reply, letting her know she had his full support. He trusted her to handle the immediate aftermath, and he knew she would approach the staff and the patrons with the same warmth and respect that had always defined his leadership. The rest of the day, Samuel spent reflecting on how he could implement more lasting changes. He thought about the hiring practices, the training programs, and even the way he communicated the core values of Hart Cafes to new employees. He realized that while his expansion had been successful, it had also diluted the connection he once had with each location. The cafe he'd visited this morning was proof that not everyone shared his vision, and it was his responsibility to ensure that the essence of Hart Cafes wasn't lost in the growth. He began to sketch out ideas in his notebook, jotting down notes about potential changes to employee training, a new mentorship program, and regular visits to each cafe location. He wanted to be more involved, not just as a distant figure in an office, but as a presence in each cafe, a reminder of the values he held dear. He thought about ways to inspire his staff, to ensure they understood that their roles went beyond serving coffee. They were part of a mission to create welcoming spaces, to show kindness and respect to everyone who walked through the doors. By evening, Samuel felt a renewed sense of purpose. He'd always been passionate about his work, but today, that passion had been reignited. He had no doubt that the changes he planned to make would help his cafes better reflect the values he held so close to his heart. The next morning, Samuel woke early, eager to begin putting his plans into action. He called a meeting with his leadership team, gathering them in a spacious, light-filled room at Hart Cafes' main office. His team, a mix of seasoned professionals and young visionaries, looked at him with a blend of admiration and curiosity, sensing that this meeting would be different from the usual agenda-focused discussions. Samuel began by sharing the experience he'd had at the cafe the previous day, recounting the way he'd been treated, the dismissive behavior of the staff, and the disrespectful comments. He spoke calmly, his voice measured, but there was a fire in his eyes that left no room for doubt. His team listened intently, some nodding with understanding, others looking troubled by the reminder of how easily prejudice could seep into their own ranks. "I built Hart Cafes with a vision," Samuel said, his voice steady and clear. "A vision of a place where everyone feels welcome, where respect and kindness are the foundation of everything we do. But yesterday I saw that vision slipping away, and that's something I can't allow to happen." He paused, looking around the room, meeting each person's gaze with an intensity that conveyed his commitment. "We're going to make changes," he continued. "I want every employee, from barista to manager, to go through renewed training, not just in customer service, but in understanding what it means to be part of Hart Cafes. I want them to feel connected to this vision, to see that they're not just serving coffee, they're part of a community we're building together." His leadership team nodded, absorbing his words, their expressions reflecting a shared determination. Samuel outlined his ideas for the mentorship program, explaining that he wanted experienced staff members who embodied the values of Hart Cafes to mentor newer employees. He wanted this to be a place where people could learn, grow, and feel proud to be part of something meaningful. "I also want to be more present," Samuel said, surprising some of his team members. I'm going to make regular visits to each location, to spend time with the staff, to hear their stories, to see firsthand how we're doing. It's important that they know I'm here, that this isn't just a business to me, it's a family." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling over them. Then, one by one, his team members nodded, a ripple of agreement spreading through the room. As the meeting came to a close, Samuel felt a renewed sense of optimism. He could see the commitment in his team's faces, the understanding that they were all part of something larger than just a cafe chain. He knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but he was confident that they were on the right path. Over the next few weeks, Samuel's vision began to take shape. Rachel, as always, proved to be an invaluable ally, helping to implement the new training programs and connecting with employees across various locations. She ensured that each cafe held meetings to discuss the core values, to remind everyone of the importance of treating every customer with respect and kindness. Samuel stayed true to his word, visiting each location himself, often arriving unannounced, taking time to speak with the staff, to listen to their experiences, their challenges, and their hopes. He shared stories from his own journey, the struggles he'd faced, the prejudices he'd overcome, and the resilience that had carried him through it all. With each visit, he felt the spirit of Heart Cafes being rekindled, as if a spark had been reignited in every corner of his business. He made a point to revisit the cafe where the incident had occurred, entering quietly one afternoon to find a transformed atmosphere. The staff greeted him warmly, their smiles genuine, their energy vibrant. Rachel was there, overseeing operations, her presence a steadying influence on the team. She greeted Samuel with a nod, a knowing look passing between them. The cafe felt alive, buzzing with the warmth and inclusivity that had once defined every Heart Cafe. As he watched the staff interact with the customers, offering smiles, engaging in friendly conversation, Samuel felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had reclaimed his vision, not through anger or bitterness, but by nurturing the values he had always held dear. He knew that the journey wasn't over, that there would always be challenges, but he was ready to face them, to stand as a pillar of the legacy he'd created. And as he sat in the corner of the cafe, sipping his coffee, Samuel realized that this was more than just a business. It was a testament to resilience, to the belief that respect and kindness could overcome any prejudice. He had faced disrespect and reclaimed his dignity, not with force, but with a quiet strength that would leave an indelible mark on everyone who walked through those doors. Over the next few months, the atmosphere in every Heart Cafe across the city began to shift, becoming a true reflection of Samuel Hart's vision. The changes Samuel had implemented were beginning to take root, transforming not only the way his employees worked, but also the way patrons experienced each visit. The mentorship program, spearheaded by Rachel, brought experienced staff together with newer hires, fostering a sense of camaraderie and shared purpose that hadn't been felt in some time. Each employee now had a deeper understanding of the values that set Heart Cafes apart, and they were reminded that they were not simply working for a paycheck but were part of a mission. Samuel's frequent visits had also created a sense of excitement and accountability among the staff. No longer just a figure behind a corporate logo, Samuel had become a visible presence in each cafe. His warm greetings, his open ear to feedback, and his genuine interest in his employees' stories had begun to resonate with the staff in profound ways. He took the time to listen to each person, to hear their aspirations, their challenges, and even their personal goals beyond their work at the cafe. This approach fostered a sense of loyalty and respect that motivated everyone to uphold the principles he cherished. One of the most transformative policies Samuel introduced was an ongoing training program centered on empathy and inclusivity. He partnered with local organizations that specialized in anti-bias training, bringing in experts to lead workshops and discussions with the staff. These sessions weren't merely lectures but interactive experiences that challenged the employees to examine their own biases and assumptions. Brad and Jessica's actions had left a mark, but Samuel wanted his employees to understand that every customer, no matter their background or appearance, deserved respect. The workshops became a place for honest reflection and growth, as staff members began to see their work as a chance to connect with people from all walks of life. The response from patrons was equally remarkable. Word of the changes spread quickly and people began to talk about the warm, welcoming vibe that radiated from every Heart Cafe. Longtime customers noticed the difference and often left feedback expressing their appreciation for the renewed spirit of kindness that infused each interaction. New customers, drawn in by the cafe's reputation, felt comfortable and valued, finding it a rare gem in the bustling city. Patrons from different backgrounds, ages, and walks of life found themselves enjoying their time at the cafes, no longer feeling like outsiders in a space that was open to all. One afternoon, Samuel decided to visit the original location where the incident with Brad and Jessica had occurred. This time, he chose to sit by the counter, watching quietly as the baristas worked, their movements smooth and efficient. The staff greeted him warmly, with genuine smiles and respectful nods, but they continued to serve the other customers with the same level of warmth and professionalism. The cafe was busy, but there was a newfound sense of calm and unity in the air, a quiet strength that Samuel knew was the result of months of hard work and dedication. Rachel noticed him and walked over, taking a seat across from him at a small table near the window. "How are you feeling, Mr. Hart?" she asked, her tone light but with an undertone of pride. Samuel smiled, glancing around the cafe. "I feel satisfied," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "It's good to see the staff so connected to the values we've built this place on. I think we're finally back to what I'd always hoped Hart Cafes would be." Rachel nodded, her expression warm. "The team really respects you. They see how much you care about this place, about them. I think it's inspired them to care just as much." Samuel looked at her thoughtfully, his gaze softening. "And I owe a lot of that to you, Rachel. You've done more than just keep things running, you've helped guide this transformation. You understand what this place means, maybe even more than some of the people who were here at the very beginning." Rachel blushed slightly, looking down at the table. "Thank you, Mr. Hart. It's been an honor to be part of this journey. I've learned so much from you, and I'm proud of what we've accomplished together." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as a young family entered the cafe. The barista greeted them warmly, engaging the children in playful conversation as he took their order. The parents seemed at ease, clearly appreciating the kindness shown to their family. Samuel watched, feeling a sense of pride in knowing that his vision had created this moment, that his persistence had allowed this atmosphere to flourish. As they continued to observe, an elderly man, his back slightly hunched with age, approached the counter. The staff greeted him with the same respect they gave to everyone else, patiently helping him with his order and ensuring he felt welcome. Samuel's heart swelled at the sight. This was exactly what he'd envisioned, a space where people could feel seen and respected, regardless of who they were or where they came from. The man took his coffee and found a seat near Samuel and Rachel, settling in with a contented sigh. He gave Samuel a small nod of acknowledgement, and Samuel nodded back, feeling a connection to this stranger, a shared understanding of what it meant to navigate the world with dignity, even in the face of adversity. A few minutes later, one of the baristas approached Samuel, a young man named Marcus who had been with Hart Cafes for only a few months. Marcus had a kind, easygoing nature, and Samuel had taken a liking to him during his visits. The young man had absorbed the new training with enthusiasm and had quickly become one of the most respected employees. "Mr. Hart, I just wanted to say thank you," Marcus said, his voice earnest. "Working here has really changed my perspective on a lot of things. I didn't realize how much I still had to learn, but the workshops and the training, it's made me a better person, not just a better barista." Samuel smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "That means a lot to hear, Marcus. You're doing great work here, and I'm glad you've embraced what we're trying to build. It's people like you who will keep this place going long after I'm gone." Marcus looked slightly startled, as though the thought of Hart Cafes without Samuel seemed unfathomable. "You're not going anywhere anytime soon, Mr. Hart," he said with a grin. "We need you here." Samuel chuckled, patting Marcus on the shoulder. "I suppose I'm not planning on leaving just yet. There's still plenty of work to do." Marcus returned to his station, and Samuel watched him with a quiet sense of satisfaction. He knew that people like Marcus and Rachel would carry on the legacy he'd created. They understood the importance of respect, empathy, and connection in a world that often felt too fast-paced to care. As the afternoon wore on, Samuel and Rachel continued their conversation, discussing ideas for future initiatives, ways to keep the momentum going, and new methods to ensure that the values of Hart Cafes remain strong. Samuel shared his thoughts on expanding the mentorship program, suggesting that each cafe host monthly community events to foster a sense of belonging among patrons and staff alike. Rachel listened intently, nodding along as she took mental notes. She knew that Samuel's ideas would continue to shape Hart Cafes for years to come, and she felt honored to be a part of it. They discussed the potential of inviting local artists to display their work in the cafes, hosting poetry readings, or even organizing small charity events to give back to the community. As they wrapped up their conversation, Samuel glanced around one last time, his gaze lingering on the happy faces of the customers and the contented expressions of the staff. He knew there would always be challenges ahead, but he felt confident that his cafes were in good hands. The transformation he had set in motion was no longer a dream, but a reality, and he knew that the impact would continue to ripple outward, touching the lives of everyone who entered his cafes. Standing up, Samuel extended a hand to Rachel. "Thank you for everything, Rachel. I couldn't have done this without you." She shook his hand, her grip firm. "It's been a privilege, Mr. Hart, and I'm excited to see where we go from here." With a final nod, Samuel left the cafe, stepping out into the fresh air with a renewed sense of purpose. He had reclaimed his vision, reinforced his values, and restored the heart of Hart Cafes. As he walked down the bustling street, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same quiet strength that had carried him through a lifetime of trials. Hart Cafes would continue to grow, but now they would do so with a foundation of respect, kindness, and resilience, a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. And Samuel Hart walked away, confident that he had left something truly meaningful in the world, something that would remind people of the power of dignity and respect, one cup of coffee at a time. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of Samuel's actions became even more evident throughout the Hart Cafe chain. Samuel's changes weren't just surface-level adjustments, they were deep-rooted shifts in the culture of the company that started to blossom in unexpected and beautiful ways. The staff, invigorated by the renewed focus on empathy and respect, began to innovate within their roles, bringing fresh ideas and enthusiasm that breathed new life into each cafe. Rachel, now officially promoted to a regional manager, took the initiative to implement Samuel's vision for community events. She organized the first of what would become a monthly gathering at the original Hart Cafe location. It was an art showcase featuring local painters, photographers, and sculptors, giving them a platform to share their work with the community. The cafe buzzed with energy as people from all over the city came to enjoy the art and connect with one another. Samuel attended, mingling with the crowd, and taking the time to speak with each artist about their work and their aspirations. As he moved through the event, Samuel was struck by the diversity of the attendees. There were families with young children, college students, and elderly couples, all interacting with the staff and artists in a space that felt alive with possibility. It was everything Samuel had ever hoped his cafes could be and more. People who might never have crossed paths were sharing stories, appreciating the art, and building connections. It was a testament to the power of a truly inclusive space, and it filled Samuel with pride. During the event, Marcus, now one of the cafe's shift leads, approached Samuel with a shy smile. He had been working diligently all evening, ensuring that every guest felt welcome and every artist had what they needed. "Mr. Hart, I just wanted to say thank you for letting us do this," Marcus said, his eyes bright with excitement. "I've never seen the cafe this packed, and everyone seems so happy. It feels like we're really making a difference." Samuel nodded, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. "You are making a difference, Marcus. All of you are. This is what Hart Cafes should be about, bringing people together, supporting each other, and creating a place where everyone feels they belong." Marcus beamed, clearly moved by Samuel's words. "I've been thinking about what else we could do," he said eagerly. "Maybe we could host open mic nights or work with local schools to give students a place to perform or share their work. I've got a lot of ideas." Samuel's heart swelled with pride. "Those are fantastic ideas, Marcus. I want you to work with Rachel to start putting some of them into action. You have a great mind for this, and I trust you to help us keep moving forward." As Marcus went back to his duties, Samuel took a moment to appreciate the scene around him. The walls of the cafe were adorned with vibrant artwork, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled the air. It was a stark contrast to the day he had been disrespected in this very spot. And the transformation was a testament to what could be achieved with a clear vision and the right people to bring it to life. Rachel found him a little later, her expression a mix of excitement and satisfaction. "This is going even better than I hoped," she said, looking around with a smile. "People are already asking when the next event will be." Samuel chuckled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "You've done an incredible job, Rachel. This wouldn't have been possible without your hard work." She shook her head modestly. "It's your vision, Mr. Hart. I'm just glad to be a part of it. I think we're really starting to make an impact, not just on the staff but on the whole community." "That's the goal," Samuel replied. "To create something that extends beyond these walls. To build a legacy of kindness and connection. And I believe we're well on our way." The success of the art showcase set the stage for more community-centered events across all Hart Cafe locations. Each cafe embraced the initiative, with staff members contributing their own ideas and efforts. Open mic nights, book readings, and charity drives became regular fixtures, drawing in new patrons and strengthening the bond with regulars. The cafes became more than places to grab a coffee. They were now hubs of community life, where people came together to share experiences and support one another. The changes Samuel had implemented also began to attract positive media attention. Local news outlets ran stories on the transformation of Hart Cafes, highlighting the new focus on community engagement. As the months passed, Heart Cafes became a shining example of what a business could achieve when it operated with heart and integrity. The cafes were thriving not just financially but as true community spaces that embraced people from all walks of life. Samuel's vision had not only been restored, it had evolved into something even more meaningful, something that touched lives in ways he hadn't originally imagined. One sunny afternoon, Samuel found himself back at the original cafe, sitting by the window where he had once been dismissed and ignored. The tables around him were filled with lively conversations, friends catching up, students studying, and families enjoying the warm, inviting space. The walls showcased artwork from local artists, who now took turns displaying their pieces in each cafe. A portion of the profits from any art sales went to charity, a decision that had been made by the staff themselves in one of their regular meetings. Samuel smiled to himself, reflecting on how far things had come. Rachel joined him at the table, setting down a fresh cup of coffee. She had become an invaluable part of the team, not only overseeing the cafe locations but mentoring other managers as well, teaching them to uphold the values that had become the bedrock of Heart Cafes. "I thought you might like a quiet moment to enjoy the atmosphere," she said, smiling as she took a seat across from him. "It's amazing to see how things have changed. I never imagined it could become this vibrant." Samuel nodded, savoring the rich aroma of his coffee. "It's everything I'd hoped for, Rachel. And you played a big role in making it happen. This cafe, this whole chain, it wouldn't be the same without you." Rachel blushed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you, Mr. Hart. That means a lot, but honestly, it's your vision that inspires all of us. You've created something that makes people feel like they belong, like they're part of something bigger. I think everyone who works here feels that." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the cafe buzz with life. Samuel spotted Marcus behind the counter, deftly managing orders with a confidence that spoke to his growth over the past months. The young man had flourished under Rachel's mentorship, and Samuel had no doubt that he'd be ready for even greater responsibilities in the near future. Just then, a familiar face entered the cafe, drawing Samuel's attention. It was Brad, the former barista who had treated him so poorly on that fateful day months ago. Samuel's gaze followed Brad as he hesitated by the entrance, looking around as though unsure of his place. Gone was the cocky expression that had once marked his features. Now he seemed subdued, almost humbled. Rachel noticed him too, her brow furrowing slightly. "Isn't that?" she began, her voice trailing off. Samuel nodded, setting his coffee cup down. "Yes, that's Brad. I haven't seen him since everything changed." Brad approached the counter, his posture uncertain as he waited to catch Marcus's attention. When Marcus finally noticed him, he greeted Brad with a polite smile, taking his order without a hint of judgment. Brad seemed surprised but relieved, ordering a coffee before retreating to a small table in the corner, looking around awkwardly as he waited. Rachel glanced at Samuel, her expression contemplative. "Do you think he's here because he regrets what happened?" "Perhaps," Samuel replied, his gaze steady. "People are capable of change, especially when they're given a reason to reflect. Maybe he's learned something from the experience." As they watched, Brad sat with his coffee, sipping it slowly as he observed the cafe's activity. His expression softened, a look of nostalgia or perhaps even regret crossing his face as he took in the welcoming atmosphere. Samuel considered approaching him, but he decided against it. He wanted to give Brad space, a chance to experience the cafe as a patron, to see for himself what Heart Cafes had become. A little later, Samuel saw another familiar face enter: Jessica, the former manager who had also treated him with disrespect. Unlike Brad, she carried herself with an air of resignation, as though she had accepted the consequences of her actions but hadn't fully recovered from the sting of losing her position. She spotted Samuel and Rachel but looked away, choosing a table in a quieter corner. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Looks like today is full of surprises," she murmured. "First Brad, and now Jessica." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "It's interesting to see them here. Perhaps they're seeking closure, or perhaps they're curious to see what the cafe has become. Either way, it takes a certain courage to return to a place where you've made mistakes." As Jessica and Brad sat in their separate corners, both of them watching the cafe's life unfold around them, Marcus approached Samuel's table, a hesitant look on his face. "Mr. Hart, Rachel," he began, his voice soft. "I don't mean to interrupt, but should we do something? They both look so out of place. It's almost like they're here to apologize, but they don't know how." Samuel considered this for a moment. "You're right, Marcus, but maybe they're not ready for that yet. Sometimes people need time to process, to see the impact of their actions before they're able to make amends." Rachel nodded in agreement. "I think we should let them sit, let them see for themselves what Heart Cafes has become. If they're truly here to reflect, they'll find a way to make peace with the past. Marcus looked relieved, nodding thoughtfully before returning to his duties. As he walked away, Samuel couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. He knew that his decision to terminate Brad and Jessica's employment had been necessary to protect the integrity of his vision, but he also believed in second chances. If they were here to learn, he would let them do so in their own time. As the day went on, Samuel noticed subtle changes in both Brad and Jessica's demeanor. Brad watched the staff with a look of admiration, as though he were beginning to understand the dedication and kindness that now defined Hart Cafes. Jessica, on the other hand, seemed reflective, her gaze lingering on the customers who were treated with the respect she hadn't shown in her time as manager. Eventually, Samuel saw Rachel stand up and approach Jessica's table, a small, encouraging smile on her face. She greeted Jessica warmly, breaking the ice with a gentle conversation about the cafe's recent changes. Samuel couldn't hear their words, but he watched as Jessica's tense posture began to relax, her expression softening as Rachel spoke to her with kindness and understanding. A few minutes later, Rachel returned to the table, her expression thoughtful. "I just had a word with Jessica," she told Samuel quietly. "She told me she's been thinking a lot about what happened, and that she's grateful for everything she learned here, even if it ended badly. I think she wants to move forward, but she didn't know how to start." Samuel nodded, feeling a sense of closure for all of them. "Thank you, Rachel. Sometimes all people need is a little kindness, a little encouragement to find their way back to themselves." Rachel smiled, glancing at Brad, who was still seated in the corner, lost in thought. "What about him? Do you think he's ready to make amends?" "Time will tell," Samuel replied. "But whether he does or not, I'm proud of what we've built here. Hart Cafes isn't just a business anymore, it's a reminder of what respect and compassion can create." As the afternoon light streamed through the windows, illuminating the cafe with a warm golden glow, Samuel felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that Hart Cafes would continue to thrive, not just as a place to enjoy good coffee, but as a space where people found connection, growth, and a renewed sense of purpose. And as he watched Brad and Jessica sit quietly, reflecting on their past mistakes, he knew that this cafe had become something far greater than he'd ever imagined, a place where even those who had once faltered could find a path to redemption.